for starters, let's remove the handle. So using my T25, I'm going to remove this screw off the bottom. And I'll keep all my screws just in case we need to use them again. There's another screw back here, T25 screw. Take that off. There's another screw in here. We'll remove it. So the handle should be free. But what we'll have to do is open up the trigger, or the disconnect the trigger cable or the throttle cable from the handle. Here's a good view of how the trigger handle looks inside with the spring. So I'll remove this carefully. Here's a view on the other side. So we'll put that aside like that. We'll just remove the throttle cable. Pop that out like that, and then we'll set the handle aside. We'll remove the carburetor. The carburetor is held on by two screws, two T25 screws. That's them right here. So we'll pull the carburetor back, remove the choke lever. And what I want to do here is I just want to separate the throttle cable from the carburetor. That's disconnected. And using a blunt flat blade screwdriver, I'm going to remove the fuel lines to the carburetor. I prefer to use a blunt flat blade screwdriver just so I preserve the line and I don't damage the fuel line in the process. So I use the blade of the screwdriver. I get right next to the fuel line, and I just pry carefully the line off. So here's the carburetor. We'll set that aside. This piece. Oh. I'm going to free up this line that goes into the gas tank. I'm going to free this fuel line off from the primer bulb using the same technique, flat blade screwdriver, and just carefully pry the line off like that. And now we'll remove this screw up here. Just loosen that off. Oh, let's remove it completely. There's a washer as well, so keep that together. And that cable comes detached. We'll just move this over like this for now. The next step, in order to remove the engine from the chassis, is to flip the chainsaw over, and here we can get a look at the 4 T25 bolts that keep the engine or mounts the engine to the chassis. That's what we're going to take off next. So these bolts are torqued down quite hard. So I'll try to use my T25 screwdriver and see if I can remove that by hand. So as you saw, I tried to remove these bolts with my T25 screwdriver. That proves to be a real challenge. These bolts are torqued down quite high. So I'm going to use a T25 bit, insert it into this adapter, and then put my 1/4 inch extension and my ratchet on here. And this should allow me more additional torque so I can break these bolts free. So I'm just going to carefully loosen these bolts off. Hopefully they don't break in the process. So as you saw, this broke, this bolt sheared off. We're just going to continue. We'll try taking this one off. I guess the idea here is to try to go really slow. That one also broke. I'll try the third one. Going slow. That one also broke. And let's see, are we going to get 4 for 4? That one also broke. Okay, so as you saw, we used our T25 bit on our 1/4 inch ratchet and socket, and surprise, I ended up shearing off the 4 bolts. So this is what it looks like. So this is where you might have better luck if you're doing this. I had really bad luck, so I ended up shearing off these 4 bolts. What we're going to do, or a little bit later in the video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my torch. I'm going to heat these up, and there's just enough, there's enough leftover bolt or studs here, or bolts I should say. I'm gonna try to remove it either with my vice grips, or I'm gonna demonstrate a really handy, effective technique that I've learned, where I'll weld a nut on here with my welder, and the heat that's generated by welding the nut on these stumps usually is enough to break these bolts free. So that will be demonstrated a little bit later in the video. Now I just want to finish off with tearing down the chainsaw. So what I'm planning on doing is I just want to remove the springs that hold the wrist pin in place. So I'll use a pair of very small needle nose pliers like this, and then I go in on the side and I grab the retainer spring, twist and pull out. So let's look on the paper towel. So this is basically the wrist pin retainer spring that I removed. We'll flip the saw over and I'll see if I can do the same on this side. So I'm using my needle nose pliers. I'm grabbing, bring it over. I'm basically grabbing this part of the spring in here. And I rotate and turn at the same time and pull those out. Now I hope that the wrist pin will just slide out. However, sometimes it can be a little challenging, so I'm just going to put I'm just going to grab a hammer and grab a hammer and a punch, and I'll see if we can just tap that wrist pin out. So here's the wrist pin. Just wiggle the wrist pin out and the piston should come right off the connecting rod, and we'll put that down. So at this point, this is as far I want to get at disassembling the saw. So we'll put this aside for now. I wanted to just make sure everyone was clear on how I removed the wrist pin from the connecting rod for the chainsaw. You saw me use this punch, and what's really important is I would recommend that you're careful when you punch out the wrist pin in case you're planning on reusing it. So I chose this punch to push out the wrist pin because if you come closer and you look at the wrist pin, it's not a through hole. So the punch actually goes inside and makes contact with the wrist pin. So when I tapped out the wrist pin, I essentially went like this and then tapped it out. And what we'll do in the next follow-up video is we're going to work at removing these studs so we can salvage, or we can perhaps potentially reuse the cylinder head. So stay tuned and I'll show you how to do that.